But welcome guys, 10 Mile Mushrooms. So we are a specialty gourmet organic mushroom farm, meaning that we only grow wood-loving species of mushrooms. So we don't grow the portobellas, the buttons, or anything in between, the creminis. All of the mushrooms we grow are growing specifically on hardwood, oak, maple, things like that. And we also combine that with ag byproducts. So we're mixing this sawdust with either wheat bran or soy hulls to give it a little bit of nutrition. So we started out growing at local farmers markets. We were selling, somebody mentioned Lewisburg. We did a lot of markets at once. We were in Bloomsburg, Berwick, kind of all over, anywhere that we could get into, honestly. And slowly the business has grown to supplying other mushroom farms around the country. So that's kind of our gig now. We're selling these ready-to-fruit substrate blocks to other farms who are mostly located in metropolitan areas, and they have the capacity to grow and sell exceptionally more than we do out here in Snydertown. So that's kind of why the business focus shifted that way, instead of trying to provide every restaurant fresh mushrooms. And also this is a kind of a gourmet type of product, so it's not totally applicable for every restaurant in the area to be putting these on their pizzas or whatever else. But we have been creating some awesome relationships with some of the local restaurants. We're selling at Gezzy's. Brad just said we're selling in Lewisburg, in Bloomsburg as well at Route 11. So a couple of different places, and that's only been through Brad's help, luckily. So yeah, surf. So yeah, I'll give you a little tour, kind of explain the process. So it's definitely going to be foreign. It's absolutely, totally backwards comparatively to growing plants. I mean, there is a progression, and starting with your starters and expanding it to a larger pot, this and that is kind of the gist of what we do. But the name of the game for us is mycelial expansion. So we're looking to take this little bit of mass and expand it into enough mass in which it can produce, a sizable quantity of mushrooms. So I'll show you where we start the process. Everything starts on actually an auger plate, which is like what they grow bacteria samples on, yeast, stuff like that. So we use live tissue culture, which is one genetic code essentially, or strain of a mushroom, because we want to grow all of these blocks similarly. With mushrooms, they're dikaryotic, so this means that they take two spores, combine them. So if you're constantly mixing spores, you're constantly changing your genetics of what you're growing out at the end of the day. So we use a live tissue sample and just continue to grow out that specific strain. Strains, species, there's lots of special words for the industry. Substrate. Yeah, exactly. It's something you have to essentially keep live. They're stored long-term on auger slants in the fridge, which I'll show you. Yeah, so we store everything once it's fully grown in the fridge, just to kind of they're similar to us. Your metabolism speeds up when you're hot, so does theirs. So by getting them close to freezing, we pretty much stall out any growth or metabolism that's happening in the actual cellular structure. So yeah, come on over to the lab. There's pretty much 4 main stages. So hardwood is this is what you'd find the mushrooms growing on.
From a business perspective, easier, or was just
well, it's what you would find the mushrooms growing on in the wild. There have been experiments growing on softwood, but it's not been shown to yield as much or been as fruitful. So yeah, out here is kind of where our final product rests. This is all of our ready to fruit substrate. So we have about 12 different species of mushrooms that we're growing. So we're growing all different kinds of oyster mushrooms, blue, yellow, a brown, a pure white, a tan. So there's lots of different variations of some of these species. These blocks here are shiitake blocks. You can see that they're kind of getting a bark on them. They're very particular in how they grow. And after they grow that bark, they then start to fruit. And these take about 8 to 10 weeks, whereas some of the oyster strains only take 2 weeks. So it's greatly vastly different depending on the strain. You guys could probably wait out here and I'll bring out these items so that everybody doesn't have to cram in. You guys obviously can step into the lab here and check it out. So kind of difference between growing plants and mushrooms is everything we're doing, we are trying to sterilize it. The whole process is sterile because our biggest competitors are all of the other molds, all of the other nasty stuff that's just floating in the air. It's actually pretty crazy once I got into this industry, being able to make my own petri dishes and just seeing the stuff that's everywhere. It doesn't affect us, but there's mold and mycelium covering the entire earth around us. So yeah, this is the lab in which we do most of the processes. This is like the clean room where we try to keep everything as sterile as possible. So this is where we do all the culture work on the auger dishes, and this is where we create what's called grain spawn. So grain spawn is the second generation of growth after these little cultures. So let me grab some and I'll show you. You guys are welcome to go in there then and check it out. So, yep, so that's what I was just about to say. So there's a positive pressure flow hood built into the wall here, and we work in front of a HEPA filter inside the grow room. All of this grain is put into an autoclave and sterilized. So we'll mix up the grain over here, we'll cook it on these barrels, and then we'll put it into the mixer, mix it all up, and bag it out, and then we sterilize it. But here's sorry the table's a mess, we're always fixing stuff. But these are the 3 steps that we're working on here in the lab. So we have the actual petri dish, which I'll pass this around. So this is a chestnut strain here. And all of the myceliums are different, which is cool. And they all grow differently at different rates. They all have their own little niches. So from these dishes, we'll take a sterile scalpel, we'll cut this all up, and then we'll dump some of that into these little bags, which we call these our first generation grain bags. So as you can see on this one, the mycelium is starting to finally grow off of the auger. So once this is at about 50% colonization, we'll break it up and then we will transfer it to a G2 bag here, which these are what we take and put into our large bags. So these are like the 4 steps total. And Jerry loves knocking everything off the table. Yes, of course. Yes, so everything is hydrated. So essentially what we do, and we have some sitting over there, we let the grains sit overnight in hydrated lime water, and then we cook it and try to force steam some of the... Yeah, what the lime does is boost the pH. I don't know if you guys use hydrated lime in any of your gardening practices, but it boosts the pH real quick for about 36 hours, and then it drops, and that kind of kills off some of the microbes. Once I started doing this, it was amazing to see how resilient some of these bacteria are. I mean, to live within 15 psi for 2 hours is pretty amazing, and still, nothing harmful or anything crazy, but they can potentially cause defects in growth down the line. So all of these processes are tested time and time again. So once this gets to the point where we're ready to break it up and let it colonize further, we dump a couple of grains onto an auger dish and check and make sure, because a lot of these microscopic bacteria, you can't really tell they're growing in there without testing it on a plate. So we really pride ourselves in doing that because a lot of companies, are not taking the extra steps and the extra care to do that. And it's a really important thing, especially when you're getting grain from other sources that you may not typically be using. Yeah, so we'll do all of this in front of the flow hood. So we'll, Yep. Yeah. So we'll do this in front of the flow hood. Like we'll have. Yep. Under positive. Yep. So I mean, there's positive pressure blowing into the room. That's why the door shuts here, because it's just the extra air coming into the room, shutting the door, and then we'll work in front of a hood there. But yeah, it's most of the work in here is really, there's a lot of sterile technique involved. So you want to make sure that you're not touching up the auger when you're trying to dump it in. It's a little dexterity and a little bit of practice to find those flaws and where you can potentially just be messing up and not even notice a lot of times. It's just really, I like to say it's really detail-oriented work. It's something that you got to really stay on top of and make sure that you're showing up in a sterile laboratory type way, which is tough because we're also a dirty farm. So, it's kind of counterintuitive, So we have to make sure we're doing this sterile work in the mornings before we're all covered in dust and that kind of stuff. But feel free to go in here, check it out. These are our two little autoclaves. Yeah, go ahead.
Part of what you said was part of the job is like mycelium.
Yeah.
How many bags do you need out of, and how much that bag?
Yeah, right. Oh, I didn't show the slants. Let me grab a slant quick. Show you how we store them long term. So this is a long-term storage slant. So from this, this could potentially produce millions of pounds of mycelium and mushrooms at the end of the day. So one of these slants, you can create 50 of these plates. From one plate, you can create probably, another 50 plates. So whatever, 250 times 50, that's already that many plates. Slant, so you can see how the auger is slanted in there to give it more surface area. Yep. So this is just deep dish auger. What happens when they're sitting in the fridge? They have a tendency to dry out, or the auger releases. Because this is a sealed environment, so the auger starts releasing humidity. It gets all condensated in there, and eventually could drown the mycelium and make it unusable. But yeah, this way it kind of just eats slowly through the auger, and these store for years and years like this. There are companies now who are storing these in cryogenic storage just to make sure that they're staying in that stasis state where they're not growing at all, because mushrooms do experience old age, which is known as senescence. So growing the same strain, let's say we were growing all of these mushrooms out here, and in order to keep that strain, we were taking those mushrooms and putting them back onto our plate instead of using the master. Eventually, that strain is going to lose its vigorousness. So that's why we're going back to this master each time. Make sure we're getting it at its most vigorous point. But yeah, you guys are welcome to go check this out in here, and then we'll continue on around. Oh, you had a... Go ahead.
Upside down.
Yes, 100%. A lot of times we store them just sitting like this, just to keep the condensation from there. That's a great point. Yeah, that's actually something that took me quite a few years to learn, because just reading, I learned just from YouTube and reading on forums and trial and error, really, because there's not the master gardeners for mushrooms, and this is a very new industry. What'd you say? We have a YouTube channel. That's why he's shooting right now. Yep. You'll have to check it out. We have a lot of videos on some of the products that we create, and lots of just me kind of ditzing around here, building stuff, and all kinds of stuff. But feel free to check out the lab in there and see what we have going on. Hey guys, unfortunately that's all that we got of the farm tour with the Master Gardeners. Our mic ended up cutting out. We're kind of living and learning when it comes to using these microphones. So please feel free to give us some feedback on how the volume sounds, and you know, anything to do with the video editing or, you know, generalized tips for things that you might want to see, please check out our other tour video with the Penn State Mushroom Council, as well as the Penn State Research Center for Mushrooms and the University of Maryland's Agriculture Extension. So that's a full farm tour that we did a couple of months ago. We've since been linked in with Penn State and been fortunate enough to receive at least their updates and to be included in some really cool Mushroom Council events, you know, as a smaller grower. Like I've mentioned in some of our other videos, we're right here close to the mushroom capital of the world, so there's some pretty large growers around. So, you know, it's cool to be on Penn State's radar, to have master gardeners, to spread the good mushroom word, because, you know, this is not gardening. We are doing something totally different, totally, you know, out of the left field when it comes to growing plants. It's just so different that even these people are amazed and have a lot of questions. So thanks for checking it out. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out our other videos, our other tour videos where we go through the spawn lab. Then we go through mixing substrate, we go through our little steaming setup, our spawning lab, as well as the incubation, the grow room, and all the other goodies. So feel free to check out our other videos. We got a lot of cool homesteading stuff going on. Just working around the farm quite a bit, and we're gonna start getting real deep into the mushroom videos. This is kind of a general channel. We're just having fun with it. So stay tuned, check us out on the next one. Make sure you subscribe.